Prince Bojji was born into a royal family of giants, but he is the smallest prince in existence. When he walks among people, everyone makes fun of him because of his height, and also because he is deaf and dumb, but he tries not to pay attention to this. One day, Bojji went away from the kingdom to be alone with a beautiful view of the kingdom itself. The cage notices Bojji and decides to rob him, as he sees him wearing expensive clothes. Bojji is happy to give things away and also goes to get other things to give to the cage. Walking around the kingdom in this form, the people begin to insult him, and the children bully him. But Bojji still brings more clothes to the cage. Then Cage realizes that he can't speak and is very lonely. He feels sorry for Bojji and decides to follow him. Cage watches how everyone humiliates the guy, and Queen Hilling says that he is not worthy to be king. This greatly offends the little prince, and he quietly cries in his room. However, he remembers that he needs to go to his father, and therefore runs out of the room. The cage does not keep up with him. Then Bevan notices him, who wants to destroy the cage, since he is from the clan of Shadows, with whom the kingdom is at enmity. However, the cage attacks him, thereby diverting his attention to merge with the shadow and become invisible. Meanwhile, Bojji comes to the king and part-time his father through a small door. The king is ill and therefore cannot even get out of bed. He learned about recent events and therefore decides to give him fencing training to the best teacher in the country named Dormus. Dormus begins to teach the young prince, but he does not understand anything. Then Dormus in anger begins to destroy everything. At this moment, the second prince of Data arrives, who recently defeated the best captain of another clan in swordsmanship. He decides to train with Dormus. Surprisingly, Data displays good swordsmanship worthy of a true king, but he is still not strong enough to defeat Dormus. Bojji decides to stand up for Dormus, so he challenges his brother Data. Everyone came to watch this fight. Data starts to attack Bojji, but he very cleverly dodges his attacks. Bojji decides to counterattack, and he stabs Data in the head. Nobody expected this, and everyone is very shocked. Bojji continues to dodge and counterattack as well. However, the fight is stopped by Dormus, who tells Bojji in sign language that his fighting style is not worthy of a king, and therefore he should defend and attack properly. Data attacks Bojji, but he is unable to resist him, as Data is stronger than him. He attacks him until Apis intervenes, who stops the fight, and Data becomes the winner of the duel. Bojji is in a very bad condition. He remembers the words of his teacher, so he tries to take a real sword in his hands even despite the pain. But he does not succeed, since he is still too small. Cage crawls out from under the bed and begins to support the boy, and also becomes his friend and servant. The cage watches as Bojji goes to bed and then prepares to leave. But he notices that someone is coming to the door, and therefore hides under the bed. A woman enters the room and heals the boy with her magic. After that, Bojji looks healthy. The cage leaves the kingdom, but on the way out he is met by Bevan, who sends the cage to prison. The next day, the king chooses his successor to the royal throne. He transfers his powers to Prince Bojji, and then a demon appears from his mouth, which takes the king with him. When a new king is announced, it turns out to be Data. The queen has vetoed the will of the king, so they vote again for the new king. They end up choosing Data. Bojji is very shocked, and therefore runs away from the kingdom in tears. Bevan comes to him and informs him that the cage has gone on a journey and they will never see each other again. Bojji does not believe his words and therefore goes in search of the cage. He climbs into the cave to the large snake they are friends with, and she tells him that the cage is fine and he really went on a trip. This reassures the prince. King Data ordered Bevan to destroy those who voted against him, so that no one could place him as a full king, and also become #1 in the ranking of queens. Bevan finds Apis and wants to destroy him. However, Apis is stronger, and therefore destroys Bevan. Data wants to get rid of Bojji's older brother and orders him to be sent away from the kingdom. However, he was prevented by his mother, who does not want to ruin the reputation of Data. Bojji wants to find his friend and decides to ask the queen's permission to leave the kingdom and go on a journey. Hilling won't let him do that. Then Bojji decides to escape through the window with the help of the created rope. At that moment, the queen enters the room and pulls Bojji out. However, Bojji unhooked and began to fall down. Already on the ground, Hilling healed him and then fainted. In bed, Hilling reminisces about how close he and Bojji were before Data came along. This nostalgia makes her change her mind, and she allows Bojji to go on the trip, but with Dormas and Hokuro. After Bojji's exit, the queen felt a bad premonition. The next day, the ranking committee of kings checks on Data's strength. After the test, Data is in 90th place in the ranking of queens. While traveling, Bojji went after a butterfly and fell into a pit full of spears. He miraculously stays alive. Bojji sees the entrance to the cave and decides to go in. He discovers a wild man there who destroys the boars so that more animals fall to the ground from them. They dance, and then he says that Bojji is his next victim. Bojji got scared, so he ran away. They decide to spend the night on the street and therefore begin to have dinner. Suddenly, daggers fly into Bojji's food, which turn out to be poisoned. In the morning, they discover fox cubs and bury them according to tradition. They go to a village where there is a hole out of the ground called the Gates of Hell, and it is teeming with lava. Bojji and Dormas decide to take a closer look at this hole. Dormas throws Bojji into the pit, as ordered by King Data. He repents of this, but cannot disobey the order. Meanwhile, Data has a strange dream. Because of this, he wakes up and decides to take his father's full power. He descends underground, where he is met by guards. They begin to prepare a potion that will give strength to the young king. To do this, they destroy the frozen body of the king, and then heat the resulting juice from the body, from which the eagle is then born. The guards put him in a cage and destroy him so that Data can drink his power. However, Data refuses to drink it, as she wants to become a strong king in her own strength through training. But the guards force him to drink, then he fights with them and defeats them. Meanwhile, Bojji turns out to be alive. The cage saved him. He fired his crossbow, and they fell on a rock. It turns out that Dormas wanted to get rid of Bojji all along, but was constantly saved by the cage. They both start crying and then laughing. They need to get out of the hole, but the cage suggested they go down, as there is a person living there who can make Bojji stronger. Along the way, they are poisoned with poisonous gas and fall unconscious. Hokuro learns of what is happening, and therefore decides to avenge Bojji and attacks Dormas. But Dormas easily defeats him, and then injures his hands so that his conscience does not gnaw at him. The cage and Bojji are rescued by the riders, who bring them to the local Desha king. They ask Desha to make Bojji stronger. Desha asks to see what Bojji is capable of. Bojji has to fight with the head of the Order of the Underworld, who is the strongest person. Bojji will attack him and give him crushing blows. The king is not happy with this fighting style, but the cage asks for a chance to show him how good Bojji is at dodging. When the head of the Order attacks, Bojji easily dodges all of his attacks. However, this is not enough for Desha to endow him with power, and therefore kicks them out. Bojji thinks he's gotten stronger and decides to pick up the stone. However, he could not even lift a small stone. Then the guard gives the letter to the cage and says that they need to go to King Despa. He is Deska's younger brother. Meanwhile, Apis decides to destroy King Data, but is stopped by a mirror, which he recognizes as Miranjo. Data decides to destroy Apis, but the mirror does not allow him to do this. At this moment, he is attacked by Apis himself, as the mirror ordered him to. They pour eagle juice into it, but it turns out that this is not a potion in order to become strong, but a resurrection elixir to resurrect the king. The cage and Bojji find King Despa, and he agrees to train them for a small fee. Despa can see the future, and therefore he sees the future of Bojji. Bojji won't be able to get stronger even if he trains for a long time. This upsets Bojji, but Despa decides to help him get stronger anyway. They go to bed, and in the morning Bojji decides to clean up and cook food. He thinks he's doing great. The cage and Despa try breakfast, but it turns out to be disgusting, and Bojji devours it on both cheeks. This is due to the fact that Bojji is a giant, and giants can eat anything. After breakfast, Despa and Bojji go to the hall where many weapons are stored. Bojji chooses his weapon, and they start training. As the weeks went by, Bojji would come back from training tired, and in the morning, he and the cage would clean up. One day, when the cage was cleaning, he heard a roar. He immediately went to Bojji, but Despa did not let him inside the room. Through the small opening, he noticed that Bojji was standing next to the split large stone, and Despa was closing the doors. Meanwhile, the king, who is in Despa's body, plans to destroy Hilling with the help of tiger demons. Hokuro wants to report everything to the queen, but Dormas stops him, since his life is completely dependent on the queen. Despite this, Hokuro still decides to report the Bojji incident to the queen. Then she, in a rage, decides to execute him. On the street, during the execution, Dormus saves him. They are about to run, but the king stops them. The king reveals that Bojji is still alive, as the mirror told him. Despite this, Dormus and Hokuro are removed from their positions. The king announces his resurrection to Queen Hilling, and also demonstrates his power to everyone by turning a tree into a diamond. Meanwhile, Despa tells the cage that he taught Bojji Despa's techniques, and he is now fully prepared. Data himself wakes up in his mind and tries to find a way out of endless space. Hilling decides to return his son Data, and therefore goes to the king to pity him, since this is his son too. She starts screaming, and Dade begins to hear it, and also screams back. Hilling finds where the sound is coming from, and she decides to get Data out of there, even destroying the king. But the guard stops her, because by destroying the king, she destroyed Data himself. She is cut down, and the king orders her to be taken out of the country, so that nothing can threaten her danger. Data felt helpless, and he realized that Bojji felt the same way. Meanwhile, Bojji and his friends go to celebrate his completion of training. But before that, Bojji shows his sword, or rather his saber. At dinner, they are approached by the Atom brothers, who begin to humiliate Despa and Bojji, but they decide not to fight them. However, they get Bojji, and Despa decides to attack one of the brothers. Then the three of them decide to attack Despu. Bojji comes to his defense and wants to fight them. He punches one in the face, but nothing happens. But after a few seconds, he falls to the floor. This was due to the fact that Bojji found his pain point and attacked on it. He then also attacks the other two brothers. One of them stands up and offers to fight with swords. Then Bojji attacks again with his saber and cuts down the opponent. It turns out that he hit his nerve, which does not give a rush of blood to the brain. Because of this, the enemy loses consciousness. They thank Despa and continue on their journey. Despa thanks the three brothers and gives them money for the fake attack. However, Bojji still has power. It turns out that Bevan is alive. He was saved by a huge snake. The serpent tells him the news of the kingdom. And Cage remembers his words, so he tells Bojji that the kingdom is embroiled in a huge conspiracy. Bojji begins to become disillusioned with the queen, but remembers Despa's words, and therefore begins to trust her. King Desha learns that criminals who want to enter the kingdom have escaped from his cell. Using this opportunity, he wants to seize the kingdom and subjugate it to himself. While Bojji and the cage are saying goodbye to Despa, the Underworld Order army arrives and takes Bojji and the cage to take them home, as it is not safe to walk down the street. Along the way, they tell what monsters got out of the prison. Meanwhile, Hilling has prepared an army to attack the king. However, Apis with a mirror is already waiting for her, who captured the king. If you want the second part, then write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like and press the bell so as not to miss new videos. AniMap was with you. Bye everyone.